Hey everybody, Mark Callahan, Mr. Saltwater Tank, coming to you from a lobby of that houses two 2,500 gallon tanks. There's one behind me, and then there's one that is exact same dimensions right in front of me. So, how big is this tank? It's that big and that tall. Okay. 14 feet long, 14 feet this way, 4 feet wide, 6 feet tall. Comes down to about 2,500 gallons. Now, what is in there? Yes, this is an insert. This is not a reef. It looks like a reef because the guys at Rock and Reef, Keith and Jared and everyone there did a really good job building an insert for this tank. So not a reef tank, but still a gorgeous tank, and it's really great to look at. So again, 14 feet long, 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide, for a total of about 2,500 gallons. This is an acrylic tank. Can't make glass that dimension, so this is acrylic. Now, I did not do the initial design on this system. I was called in to consult on this tank. Things weren't going best because the initial design, the guys who did it, entertaining on TV, and that's about it. So that wasn't going so well. I was brought in to consult on it. What we did was we stripped this whole system down. This one, and remember, there's another 2,500 gallon tank right in front of me on the other side of this lobby. So we stripped these down, started over. It was a tank on a stand, and that was it. Ripped down all the filtration, if you call it filtration, what was there. Ripped down the insert, suctioned down all the sand, and started over. I was given carte blanche on this one. Do what I recommend. We actually took one of the executives out of his office, took over the office and made it a fish room because, I mean, tanks first, right? That makes sense. And rebuilt this thing over the course of several months. So, big project. Fun thing, one of the fun things about this tank is this tank, the 2,500 gallon behind me, and the other 2,500 gallon tank right in front of me by about 30 feet, they're tied together into one sump. So we have a total water volume, including the sump, about 6,000 gallons. And there's no way to get water from the other tank via gravity to the sump using gravity. So we actually pump water both ways on this system. Now this tank behind me drains naturally into the sump, much like your tank does. The tank in front of me, I pump water to it, and then I pump water back at the exact same rate. The pumps on this tank are Abyss A1200s. That pump has a 4-inch in and a 3-inch out. So I actually ran the lines from the sump up into the ceiling. In the case of the tank that's in front of me, it went out into the hallway over the other way, over there, down the hallway about 60 feet. Lots of, hours, days really spent up in the drop ceiling with that. That was fun, learned a lot. So, big system here. Yes, these are acrylic tanks and they are inserts. However, I don't understand that we're all reefers. I am doing two 1,000 gallon reefs here in the same plant. The client was thrilled with these tanks, how they turned out. So they said, hey, let's do some reefs. So I'm putting in two 1,000 gallon reef tanks just down the hallway here, getting started on that project, be here for a while, working on that. So a lot of fun with these systems. And I mean, I don't know how the receptionist gets much work done out here. I would just stare at that all day long. All these fish were quarantined before they were put into the tank. Most of them came from Australia, from Cairns Marine. We also have fish in here from Live Aquarius Divers Den. This tank behind me is the community tank. The one across from me is more of the aggressive predator tank. We've got bigger angels in there, non-reef safe angels, even though this isn't a reef. We went with different angels over here. We have crosshatch triggers, banded angelfish, clarion angels, scribbled angels, panther groupers. We got a stars and stripes puffer in here, all kinds of fish in the more aggressive type of predator tank. What kind of lights are driving this? Cade wants to know. Radions, Ecotech Radions are what was on the tank, and we left them there because they're fully capable of firing up this tank. So maybe a little overkill, but the client wanted to light it up, so that's what the original builders chose. Of course, those lights are capable, so I just left them on there. So remember, yes, I'm streaming to you tonight, showing you this tank. This is a Q&A, so if you have questions about this system or your system, feel free to fire away because this is a Q&A session. Maybe everyone would just like me to turn the lights back off and just move out of the way so they can stare at the tank. I can do that too. I'm fine with that. If you'd rather have me just move and quit yapping and stare at the tank, let me know. I can do that. Some of you might be wondering, what's with this stuff? Oh, see? Now someone went in the room and turned on the lights in the fish room because the filtration is actually behind the tank. The sump is 8 feet long, about 4 feet tall, and 3 feet wide. It's behind this tank. Protein skimmer, for those of you that want to know, it's about 8 feet tall and 4 feet around. So, sizable stuff. That's back there in the fish room. JA says, move out for a minute. All right, JA, I'll take that's how I answer your question, JA. I'm going to move out for a minute, let you look at the tank, and see who's, looks like the cleaning crew is back behind the tank. See if I can shoo them out so I can turn the light off back there and let everyone have a better look at the tank. So, all right, so some of you are wondering how you get to the top of the tank. There's a ladder. I'll show you. Keep an eye right there. See that black thing right there? That's the ladder to get to the top of the tank because there's a catwalk above the tank. So keep your eye right there. I'll go show you the ladder and let Jay have another look at the tank. There you go. How many lights? There are 8 radions over this tank. Remember, it's 14 feet long, 4 feet wide, 6 feet deep. How to keep this thing clean? You get in it. We dive it. The cleanup crew. They're kind of like cleanup crews, except they're people. They're real people. Real people cleanup crews. Now available for purchase at saltwateraquarium.com. A real crew to come get in and clean your tank. They get in there and scrub this tank a couple times a week, and they keep it looking great. Jerry, Alex, Steph, the whole team over at Refon do a great job. Really happy that I chose them to maintain this tank after the build was over. So there you go, Jay. There's the look. You get over the tank with the ladder. So a lot of fun. All right, Mark says, I have a 32-gallon BioCube and I've added an extra flow pump. How do I know if I have too much flow? Great question, Mark. How do you know if you have too much flow? Here's how you know. One, if you're starting moving sand around, you've got too much flow. Now, the flow pump, you're probably talking about a power head. You may be able to get around that by pointing it up a little bit or pointing it off the back wall. There's ways that you can likely get around that, Mark, if that's what's happening in your tank. Also, if your fish are just sitting there swimming with everything they got away from the pump, you have too much flow. Also, another way to tell is what kind of corals do you have in the tank. If you have soft corals in there, well, they don't need as much flow. If they're constantly getting blown over in one direction, like a hurricane is moving through, you've got too much flow. Those are all ways to tell if you have too much flow in your tank. One nice thing about the smaller tanks, like the BioCube Mark, you don't need tons of flow to get a lot of movement in that tank. The water coming from the back is providing some flow. You can add one extra flow pump like a small C-shaped power head in there, and you're likely going to get a lot done. So great question on that. Would love to see a photo of your BioCube. That's how you know when you have too much flow. Yes, especially as Reef the Sea Forever says, if the flesh starts ripping off your coral, you've got too much flow as well. It takes a while to get there. The coral will likely probably die and then the flesh will come off, but all signs on that you have too much flow in that tank. All right, Cade wants to know. Cade says, recently acquired an 86-gallon hexagon reef. Really? It's a reef-ready hexagon tank? I gotta see it, Cade. Send me a photo of that. That sounds interesting. So it's 31 inches all the way around. Ken, this is like your old, your first reef tank. So trying to decide between a Hydra 64 and a Photon or a Kessil Ap9x. So how would you decide between those? All right, Kate, a couple of ways that I would look at that. One, I'm going to choose a name brand light with a company that's been around. So that narrows it down between the Hydra from Aqua Illuminations and the Kessil. They're going to be companies that I know where they're going to be around. They're going to give you great support. There's already going to be plenty of documentation on these lights with videos and other things. So if you have an issue, one, you can talk to someone and get support, but also there's plenty of already documentation out there. So between the Ap9x and the Hydra 64, okay, so both of those are going to get the job done. A couple different ways that I would look at them, because both the Kessil Ap9x, the Ap9x, and the Hydra 64 are lights that are definitely going to get the job done. So one thing you're going to get out of the Kessil that you'll get some out of, but not as much with the Kessil, is tons of shimmer. Kessils are known for their shimmer. So if you like the shimmer look, the metal halide look, then the Ap9x is definitely going to get that done. Hydra 64 will give you some little different look, a little flatter light. Again, this is personal preference. One, both of those lights are going to grow coral. If you like the metal halide, you're going to lean more towards the Kessil. If you like a flatter-ish type of light, not as much shimmer, then you're going to go the Hydra 64 route. The other thing is, in terms of control, Hydra 64 will likely have, especially if it's a newer Hydra, will have Wi-Fi built in. The Kessil, if you want to control it off your phone, is either going to require it to be plugged into an Apex, or you have to get the Wi-Fi dongle. It just snaps right on the top and gives you control. So that's another way that I would look at between the light. Part of it, if you're less techie, the Kessil is going to be more user-friendly to set up. You plug it in, there's dials on the top to dial in your color and your intensity. Just keep in mind it won't have any kind of built-in timer, so the Kessil is going to need some kind of control to turn it off or turn it on. The Hydra 64 will have that control built in. It will also have the Wi-Fi built in, so you can use your smartphone or your computer to control it. In both of those, the Hydra 64 and the Kessil 9X are fully capable lights. The question is, how much of a techie are you, and then really how much shimmer? That's how I would decide. Great question, Cade. Would love to see that hex reef. Send me a photo of that. I am curious what that thing looks like. All right, Sabrina wants to know. She says she needs help with her clownfish. They're dying after you made a large water change. All right, Sabrina. Here's I would look for issues. Doing a water change is usually a good thing for your tank. You're taking nutrients out, putting in fresh, hopefully nutrient-free salt water. However, you want to get the perimeters of your salt water near the perimeters of your tank. So if you did a large water change and maybe your new water that you were putting in was really warm versus your tank, or really cold, that can throw the parameters in your tank for a spin and can mess up the fish as well. Also, if you mixed up your salt water and then as soon as you got to the right salinity, say that it took you 15 minutes or 30 minutes and you put it in the tank, that could be a sign as well. When we're mixing up salt, a lot of times there's chemical reactions that have to go. Some of the manufacturers even recommend mixing it for hours before you put it in your tank. You might have mixed it up too quickly, put it in the tank, and that could have caused some issues. So if the clownfish are suddenly dying after you did a water change, I'm willing to bet that you threw the parameters for tailspin, they changed a lot. The fish are likely going to be okay. They may just be a little stressed out. leave them be. They may recover. Clownfish are pretty hardy fish, especially if they're doing okay beforehand. So you turn the lights out, let them rest. Hopefully they recover. Those are all things to look at when you do your next water change. Hopefully you don't have the same thing happen. All right, Steven. Steven is here every week. Steven, thanks for watching with us. Steven says, in a larger SPS tank, larger being 500 gallons, how do you feed the calcium reactor since the peristaltic pump can't keep up? All right, here's what I do, Steven. I use a C-shaped pump to feed that calcium reactor. I use geocalcium reactors on my reefs. That's what's going on the new one. It hooks up to a C-shaped pump, a silence. I believe I have a 1.0 on that. And it pushes water constantly through the calcium reactor at a rate that's enough to let the calcium reactor do the thing. Because on my tank, and like on your 500-gallon tank, you need a sizable calcium reactor to get that done. So the C-shaped silence pumps, 1.0, maybe even a 0.5. It's not going to hurt for you to do the 1.0. That's going to get the job done for feeding your calcium reactor. When your 500-gallon tank really gets cranking, you've got a lot of SPS in there growing a lot. You're going to have a constant stream of effluent coming out of that calcium reactor, so you're going to need plenty of flow going to it. So that's a great time to stop with the peristaltic pump, switch over to the C-shaped silence. 1.0 is probably going to get the job done for you, and you can go from there. Good luck on the 500-gallon SPS tank. Would love to see your thoughts on that. Would love to see the photo of that and see what and see what that looks like. Love SPS tanks, love softy tanks too, even fish-only tanks like this one as well. All those get my attention. I love them. They're a lot of fun. And look, saltwater tank is a saltwater tank. Love that everyone has a saltwater tank. Would love to have everyone be very successful with that. Some people dog on softy tanks because they're like, hey man, you can't keep SPS. Whatever. Softy tanks have their place too. There can be plenty of softy tanks, plenty of fish-only tanks, SPS, different strokes for different folks. Whatever you have, enjoy it. Build it out to your taste. You don't have to build a tank because someone else said you should put a different type of coral in there. All right, great questions. Wow. So, JA, I mentioned earlier in the live stream that I'm building two 1,000-gallon reef tanks here in the same place. Are they going to be connected? They're not going to be connected to this tank. They're actually not going to be connected to each other. They're going to be two totally separate systems. Now, the tank sits next to one another, but they're two separate systems. They're going to be pretty much mirror images of one another, but why are they not connected to a common sump? Because the animals that are going to be kept in the two different tanks are very different with different needs. Therefore, we put two completely different systems on those tanks. They're going to run independently of one another. Filtration will be the same, but the two tanks, the water from both tanks will not interact in any way. Great question. So Justin wants to know, is it bad to run a carbon reactor all the time? Carbon reactor, I'm assuming you're talking about using activated carbon. The answer to that, Justin, is no. Nothing wrong with using a carbon reactor all the time. I run it on my tanks all the time. What you don't want to do with your carbon reactor is you don't want to tumble that activated carbon. That activated carbon should stay very still, no tumbling whatsoever. If you tumble it, you can create carbon dust, which in studies, one study, it's never been done again, it's never been proven, really looked at, indicated some carbon dust with head and lateral line erosion. Disclaimer, again, number one, it was never replicated. Number two, it was a poor grade of carbon. And number three, there is a lot of dust. If you run your carbon reactor correctly with no tumbling, you should not have any dust rolling off of your carbon reactor. I have no concerns running activated carbon all the time. One catch with this is, especially for those of you starting new tanks, you don't want to start your activated carbon when you start the tank, when it's new. You've got to let some bacteria, some biofilm stuff grow up in the tank, so you don't want to be stripping it out by running activated carbon. You want to give those organisms everything they need to get going, so having a little bit of nutrients, organics in your tank isn't going to hurt. I don't start activated carbon until about a month into the tank's life. All right, Chris. The old dreaded Aiptasia. Got to give a shout out to Bob, my tank buddy, who's dealing with this. have I ever successfully gotten rid of Aiptasia fully out of a reef tank? If so, how? Yes, I have a couple times. There's a couple ways to do it. One I found that works well is using Berga nudibranchs. Now, the catch with these is they can be hard to find. The other thing about Bergas are they take a while, and you need a fair amount of them in your tank to go mow down all your Aiptasia. They're little guys. They're also nocturnal, so you want to put them in your tank at night. Otherwise, they could get picked on by fish. Now, most fish won't eat them, but if a fish gets curious about them and wants to pick at them, that can be bad. So if you put 5 Berga nudibranchs in a 200-gallon tank to deal with your Aiptasia problem, they're probably going to get it done, but it's going to take time. I've put Berga nudibranchs in like a 40-gallon breeder that was overrun with Aiptasia. It took them about 2 months to fully mow down the Aiptasia, so you got to be patient with it. Now, if you can't find Bergas, then what? The other thing that works really well is an army of peppermint shrimp. Now, I say an army of peppermint shrimp because this is a part that a lot of people miss. Same thing, if you put 5 peppermint shrimp in, even a 90-gallon tank, they're probably not going to go after the Aiptasia because they're going to wait for the fish waste, the uneaten fish food. That's a lot easier for them to eat. They're like, why would I take the effort to go eat this Aiptasia when I can just sit over here and wait for this filet mignon to be served to me every time he feeds the tank? So you have to put enough of them in there that they outcompete each other for food, and then once they've eaten up all the fish waste, uneaten fish food, then they get hungry, and then they go after the Aiptasia. Again, this can take time, and you need a lot of them. If I had an Aiptasia problem, say in a 90-gallon tank, 120-gallon tank, I would put 20 peppermint shrimp in there, maybe even 40, especially if I had like a 180-gallon tank. And then I would wait. Put them in there at night. You're probably not going to see the peppermint shrimp again. They're pretty reclusive. Then you just got to wait. In time, if you're not overfeeding your tank, you're likely going to see those Aiptasia go away. Now, is the Aiptasia actually ever completely gone? That you can't know. You might not see any Aiptasia, which is good, but there may be some small Aiptasias popping up. Those peppermint shrimp will mow those things down. Now, what about using fish to eat Aiptasia? Aiptasia-eating filefish, copperband butterflies, both of those can work. The catch here is it's a fish. They have different tastes. Some of them will eat the Aiptasia, some of them won't. There's really no way to tell until you put it into your tank and then see what you get. And then if other fish in your tank don't get along with the filefish or the copperband, well, that fish likely is going to go into Aiptasia because he's getting beat up. So adding the fish can work. It's less of a probability than adding the Bergas or the peppermint shrimp. I don't rely on the fish to mow down Aiptasia. I like to use the peppermints because peppermint shrimp are almost always available and they're usually easy to find and not that expensive. Great question. Good luck, Chris, with your Aiptasia problem. I hate those things too. They're not a lot of fun. All right, John wants to know. John says, I'm in the process of building a 300-gallon tank built for a fish room. What size sump do you recommend? All right, size is not a concern as it won't be sitting underneath the tank. Fantastic, John. The day you get your sump out from underneath your tank, you're a happy person. I understand not everyone can do that. However, you're building a fish room, you can pull in the tank with a sump out from underneath the tank. Once you have that, you'll never go back. So what size sump do you need? The answer is the biggest one that you can fit that's going to fit the filtration that you're putting in it. That's my answer. What dimensions? I don't know. I don't think about dimensions of sumps so much when I'm thinking about a fish room. I figure out what skimmer I want because most of the time I'm using an in-sump skimmer. I put that in the skimmer. I'm designed for that. And then I'm going to look, am I doing filter socks or a roller mat? Am I putting a refugium in the simmer and the sump? Am I doing a separate refugium? How big is my return pump? Kind of add all those chambers up, and then that gives me the size of my sump. I'm not focused on water volume. Most of the time, I don't even know how much the water volume the sump even holds. It's more about what am I putting in it? How much space do I need to function? And look, you've got a fish room, John. Here's the thing. Give yourself extra room in that sump. You're not going to complain. No one ever complains when they have extra room to work around their tanks. Getting a tight sump, everything's tight together. It's hard to work in there. You're not going to want to work on it. Then you won't work on it. Then you can have issues with your tank. Give yourself a chance to enjoy that, especially now that you have a fish room. All right, Matthew wants to know, Matthew's ringing my door on this one. Should I buy a Neptune PMK or just a par meeting to test your lighting? You currently have 4 T5s and a Fluval Smart LED. All right, Matthew. Here's the thing. Using the PMK, this is going to give you a constant par reading. You got to clean the thing, get your hand in there and wipe it off. Some people like that because they can see their T5s fade in terms of output. They can also measure their lights. If you're just settling into your tank, you don't have access to a par meter, then that PMK can help you dial it in. The other thing that I found with LEDs is people love the control of them. I love the control of them. However, most people, once they set it, they get their settings dialed in, most of the time they don't touch it again. So at that point, your PMK shouldn't tell you. If you start seeing a drop in par from your LEDs, you know you got issues. So me personally, I don't have a PMK in my tank because I have a par meter on hand. It's just ready whenever I need to use it. I put it in my tank when I adjust my lighting. Once the lighting's dialed in, I leave it be. If you do pick up that PMK, here's a great place to get one. Just, dropping a subtle hint, saltwateraquarium.com. I think we had them in stock. Curious to see how long it takes for you to see the par drop off from your T5's aging. I'm curious what you end up with that, Matthew, and let me know which direction that you go. Great question with that. All right. Oh, here we go. Here's a fun one. John, here we go, John. Don't give up on this one. I feel you. I've been there. John says, I have a 75-gallon tank with a sump. Dynos, that's short for dinoflagellates. They're out of control. What's your best thought to get through this ugly stage? Tank is 3 years old. I've never had a problem. You're a month and a half into this disaster. All right, John. If they're really dinoflagellates, they're really easy to deal with. Raise your nutrients. They go away. You can dose nitrates, give it about 2 weeks, they'll be gone. Dinos are very easy to deal with. I've seen them in young tanks that are really nutrient poor. The key is you actually have to add nutrients into the tank. They'll go right away. All right, Freestyle Traveler. Are you freestyler traveling now? If you are, I'm jealous. How big of a skimmer am I using on these tanks? Again, for those of you that are just joining me, this tank is 14 feet long, 6 feet tall, 4 feet front to back, 2,500 gallons. In this tank, there's one the same dimensions right in front of me. So 5,000 gallons worth of display volume. There's easily another 1,000 gallons in the filtration. The skimmer is 8 feet tall. Yeah, it's big. It gets the job done. It's not a skimmer where you take the cup off and you clean it out. The cup is actually bolted down to it. I think I had to put like 30 bolts into the thing to get the cup in. The skimmer has a wash down. We actually get in there with a toilet brush and we scrub it down every couple of days. Yeah, they're big. All right, Kevin wants to know, when you do a water change, do you add anything like MicroBacteria stability? For those of you that don't know, MicroBacteria is a mix of bacteria strains. Stability is nitrifying bacteria. Kevin, when I do a water change, I don't add those things. Why? Because especially stability, that's just nitrifying bacteria. That bacteria is terrestrial type bacteria, meaning they stick onto surfaces. Really the live rock and a little bit on the sand. So if you're doing a water change, unless you're taking out a bunch of live rock, it's not like you're killing off or upending a lot of the bacteria by doing it. So adding in more stability, adding in more nitrifying bacteria, once your tank is set up, look, nitrifying bacteria is only going to grow as much food as there is. So if you add extra nitrifying bacteria and there's no food in the form of fish waste to feed it, it's just going to die off. So I don't add anything when I do a water change. You don't need to add bacteria. There should be plenty in your tank on the surfaces, on the rocks and such. No need to do that. Great question. All right, let's see here. It's 7:30. Let's see. Here we go. Coral dip. Let's talk about corals. Daniel wants to know, what is the best or some of the best coral dip solutions? Does the dipping solution matter for different types of corals? Softies, LPS, SPS. All right, Daniel. I use two types of dips. Fauna The Dip. Yes, it's called The Dip. And Two Little Fishies Revive. Both of those we have over at saltwateraquarium.com. Those are the two dips we use. You can use Revive or the dip. I love that it's just called the dip on LPS, Softies, SPS. Doesn't matter for them, you run the same concentration. Both of those will work fine. Yes, I recommend you dip your coral. Both of those work fine on every type of coral that I've ever used. That's what I do with that. Jay wants to know, am I going to set up a new reef tank in my home? Yes, I have one. Jay, if you're on social media, cruise over to my Facebook page, facebook.com/Mr. Saltwater Tank. I posted a picture of my reef yesterday. I've got a 1,000-gallon reef up in my tank. It's been going since about the beginning of the year. Yep, definitely going to have a reef. I already have one. It's at home. Times like these, I got to travel and work on other people's tanks, but that's all right. All right, Goalie Mask from Design at Will. What a great handle. From YouTube wants to know, BTA, that's Bubble Tip Anemone, for those of you that don't know, for reef tanks, yes or no? I love this question. I love some people are like, look, you should not have a sea anemone in a reef tank. Okay, to me, it's not a reef tank until there's a sea anemone in there. And bubble tips are some of the easiest and hardiest anemones to keep. Here's the catch. Sea anemones, especially bubble tips, they can move around and they can sit somewhere for a while and then they can move around for seemingly no reason. Can they kill coral? Yes, if they park right on top of it for months on end, weeks on end, then it could kill it. However, I found that most time they don't do that. A lot of times what I will do is I'll put the sea anemone in there before I put too much coral in the tank, see where it settles, hope that it settles there, please stay put, and then build coral around it. And look, if it moves close to a coral, I'll move the coral or I'll trim it down. It's only gonna kill what it touches. It's not like if you have an SPS colony like this, and it's back here touching where my thumb is, and then you've got all this SPS over here. This part of it isn't gonna die because it's not getting touched by the sea anemone. So I don't have a problem with sea anemones for reef tanks. I think they should be in there because to me, that makes a reef tank when I have a sea anemone in there. It's a risk that I'm willing to take. Great question. Absolutely, man. Yep, Jay, I'm on Instagram as well. Instagram at Mr. Saltwater Tank. You can check it out there. All right, let's see here. Yes, look at this, an automation question. Jared, I see your comment. Can you recommend a decent ATO float valve for a gravity-fed ATO that won't clog with calc and easy as a $10 Amazon kind? Here we go. Here's my recommendation on a float valve for a gravity-fed ATO. Don't do it. Do not gravity feed your ATO into your tank, especially if you're putting calc in your top-off water. Why? Because there's no fail-safes on that. If that float valve fails, it's just going to dump water into your tank. Dumping fresh water into your saltwater tank is bad enough. In your case, David, dumping calc water into your tank is even worse. Do not gravity feed ATOs. There's plenty of great ATOs out there. I use the Neptune Systems ATO because I have apexes on my tanks. I also have used a Tunzi Osmolator. That's a great ATO. We have all kinds of ATOs over at saltwateraquarium.com. Don't gravity feed it. Get yourself an ATO. Get one that has some built-in fail-safes, backup systems. Go that way. Don't gravity feed it. It is not worth the risk. Definitely don't recommend gravity feeding ATOs. All right, let's see here. I'm going to take a break for just a second. Let you all stare at the tank because I'm getting requests to move my melon out of the way. I'll be right back. All right, the building cleanup crew is working their way down the hall here. Let me take 2 more questions before it gets too loud for everyone to hear my responses. But hey, I can always just turn mine back on, get myself out of the way, and let you all stare at the tank. All right, Tom, how big is the tank? 2,500 gallons, 14 feet long, 4 feet wide, 6 feet tall. All right, Gideon, I feel for you, buddy, on this one. You're one of the unlucky Texans that lost your tank in the February Snowmageddon. 8 days with no power. All your live rockets and brutes with heaters and wave makers. What do I do to keep it alive for the reset? All right, Gideon. If your tank had no power for 8 days, I would keep your choice live rock pieces. I would get rid of the rest, and here's why. It's likely that the nutrients in your tank went up when you had no power. You said you lost everything. Live rock can take in those nutrients. You put that nutrient-rich live rock into your new tank, you can likely be dealing with a nutrient issue for a while. So pick a couple of the choice pieces that you like, keep them alive with the brutes, with the heaters. Make sure your salinity is staying stable, topping it off with RODI water. It's not going to hurt if you want to put a little bit of small amount of nitrates in there, nitrifying bacteria, to keep the bacteria in there alive. But just because it's live rock, if the bacteria in there doesn't have any food in the form of fish waste or other organics, it's going to die off as well. But I wouldn't use all of it. I would, again, keep a couple of choice pieces, start over. You don't want to deal with nutrient issues in a brand new tank. You don't know how long it can take to get those nutrients out of the live rock. I've seen it lots of times with tanks. Get new rock, keep a couple of the choice ones, and start over. Fill you on that one. Hopefully this time around you also can grab yourself some kind of generator emergency kit. By the way, we do have an emergency checklist over at saltwateraquarium.com. For those of you on our email list, we kicked it out last week. You can grab that. We have links to products in there that we recommend. That's an emergency list that I have, that I've developed. Every client that I have, and even for myself, I have a 5-gallon bucket that's an emergency kit. It has things like battery-driven air bubblers in there, water conditioner, so if your RODI unit fails, you can't get water, you can at least get tap water. You at least have an option for that. All right, here we go. Last question for the night before I get overrun by the cleaning crew. Marcus wants to know, when I stir or vacuum the sand bed, you just get the top layer, you go till they hit the glass, assuming I only do small sections at a time. All right, Marcus, so number one, I don't vacuum my sand. Just don't mess with it. I have fish to do the job for me. You vacuuming your sand, one, you're doing anything really great, which is what I recommend, only doing a small section at a time. Then, if I was vacuuming the sand, sure, I would go down until I touch the glass, assuming you're not sucking up a bunch of sand while you're doing it. Sifting your sand with a siphon, it's one of those there's a feel to it, depending on how heavy your sand is, how deep the sand bed is. So I want to see that sand getting fluidized in the suction when I'm doing it. That way I know the water that's moving through it is sucking stuff out. In my case, I don't, but if you want to do it, go ahead and go down into the glass, as long as you're not sucking out the sand. All right, last question of the night, and then I'll let you all stare at the tank. James wants to know, am I planning on restarting scuba diving trips again? Absolutely, James. As soon as the borders open up, I'm out of here. I'm gone. I've been chomping at the bit, ready to go. Didn't get to go last year. Probably not going to get to go this year. I don't see Australia or Fiji opening up. It's going to be a 2022 thing. Definitely be talking about that once the borders open. Yeah, that's been, for me personally, the hardest part of the whole pandemic has been not getting to travel internationally and see the reefs. Understand people are on different spectrums about what you're dealing with the pandemic, but for me, not getting to go international has been the hardest part for me. Absolutely, when I can go, I will go. Yeah. Until now, I have my tank, I have my clients' reefs. I have tanks like this where I get to stare and enjoy things. As soon as I can get out of the country, I'm out of here with that. I'll let you all stare at the tank for a little bit. Let me see if I can move this closer, let you all get a little closer look. Thanks for being with me. I will be back, should be home next week. Don't even know my schedule for next week. At my home reef. For those of you that haven't seen it, you can jump on Facebook or Instagram, and you can join us next week, same time, Monday at 7 p.m. Central. I should be at home and you can see the reef den. Of course, I'll answer your questions. Thanks for being with us. If you're wondering where you should get some really sweet fish gear, shameless self-promotion, saltwaterquarium.com. Talked about the coral dip tonight and other things. All those products are available over there at Saltwater. I'm now going to get out of the way and let you all stir at the tank.